What's up guys, can you believe it? Just a couple of days ago, Dr. Mike Israetel from Renaissance Periodization dropped a new video, and wouldn't you know it, it's about arm wrestling. That's right, some of you long-term viewers of this channel may know that I have cited Dr. Mike Israetel in many a video that I've created over the past 2 years, and he is definitely someone that I've learned a lot from, and so just seeing him make a video on this passion of ours, it's just really amazing. So I'm really excited to hear what he has to say about arm wrestling.
Arm wrestling is incredible because with almost no damage to anyone, no hitting in the face, no spending minutes warming up and then a whole wrestling match or MMA match later, you just cut right to the chase. Who is more masculine?
That is so true. Many times when I ask people about why do they love arm wrestling, why arm wrestling out of every other thing, people usually find it really difficult to articulate why they gravitate towards arm wrestling as opposed to other martial arts. Because don't be confused, arm wrestling is a form of martial art. It is a combat sport between two people, and it all goes down to not wanting to be punched in the face. That's right. Arm wrestling is a sport for a bunch of pussies, essentially speaking. In a perfect world, if there was such a sport where we could fight without getting brain damage or have the risk of getting arm barred and getting our arms broken, we would do that over arm wrestling, I think. But yeah, most arm wrestlers, I think, have this innate drive for combat. It's just that we are not brave enough to take it to the next level and actually step up against someone in the ring.
But it turns out that it's actually rotation at the shoulder joint, which does a lot of the work. And a lot of the musculature that does that is actually deep and internal to the shoulders and sits there in your back somewhere and up front here. And a lot of it is the ability to pronate and supinate depending on how your grip goes and what technical execution you have. And a lot of those muscles, yes, the biceps do contribute, but a lot of those muscles sit all the way around here in the forearm area. And a lot of them are actually deep muscles. So arm wrestling is one of those kind of like, what's that called? Sleeper sports? Totally agree. A couple of points to unpack from what Dr. Mike just said. You know, arm wrestling, first of all, talking about arm wrestling being a sleeper sport. Case in point, myself, definitely a prime example of being a sleeper build sort of person. No one would expect me, someone like me, to be as strong as I am, but I regularly am able to beat people who on the surface look like they might be stronger, but because of these muscles that are not immediately visible on the surface, I have this added advantage, and also along with other leverage advantages and things like that. Certain things that he pointed out, internal rotation, that point I wanted to clarify a little because it might get a little bit confusing, especially for those who are pretty new to arm wrestling. In the video, Dr. Mike talks about internal rotation and he does this sort of movement, but in arm wrestling, we don't typically do dynamic internal rotation like this. If there is a sort of internal rotation aspect, it is more of a static force that is opposing the opponent, bringing our hand past our shoulder. There is also some form of internal rotation, but that is much more driven with the pecs as well. So coming forward this way with our shoulder, with the shoulder and the pec working together. Usually you see that in hook or press type of inside moves, not so much in a top roll, but in top roll as well, when you're setting up, some people still do have that internal rotation just to have that little bit of static side pressure being added on. Being tall is actually a big advantage in almost every sport, and for sure in arm wrestling. And the other big advantage of being tall is you can just slab more muscle onto the shit. So if you're the same relative proportions at 5'6" as 6'5", at 5'6" you might be
pretty damn jacked, relatively speaking, if you're like 180. At 6'5", to be the same relative jacked, you might be like 280 or something, and then, you know, maybe 270 or 250, and then that's just a lot more muscle that you can bring to the equation.
So, being tall in and of itself is not necessarily an advantage in arm wrestling. Well, generally speaking, if we generalize being tall, what does that mean? It means you have longer levers, it means you have bigger hands, it means you have a greater potential to pack on mass. But we have to remember that arm wrestling is also a weight class sport. So taking myself, for example, someone who competes at either 80 or 85 kilos, within that weight class, even though I might have a bigger frame than someone else in the class, I'm still limited by the weight class on how much muscle I can pack on. And in such a case, you may even argue that someone who is shorter may even have more of an advantage, because a shorter guy at 80 kilos looks way more jacked than someone at my height at close to 6 feet, but weighing at the same weight of 80 kilos. So that's why I also sort of have that sleeper build, because I'm just much more lanky. My limbs are way longer, so it takes much more muscle to pack on to fill up my frame. But of course, everything else being held equal, if the two people are of equal strength and the only thing that's different is their height, then typically the guy who's taller also has bigger hands, longer levers, and that generally does afford an advantage. Not always, but generally so.
So when you're taking your wrist and you're bending it this way, you're typically doing at least two things. One is you're technically getting your opponent's hand closer to the table, where if they touch, they lose. The other thing you're doing is you're maximally increasing your own leverage, and by opening up their grip, you're reducing theirs. If you can win the battle from a straight fist into a turned over fist, the other person's probably having a bad time, and then not only are they closer to losing, but they've lost a lot of their leverage, and now they're also even closer to losing.
Wow, really looks like Dr. Mike did do his homework when researching arm wrestling, because this is a really good way of articulating why both pronation, backed with back pressure, as well as cupping is such an important aspect of arm wrestling. Getting your opponent turned over and you preventing yourself from being turned over or supinated, super important. So these two things both relate to both increasing or decreasing, whether you're winning or losing, the lever arm from the elbow point to the tip of your fingers. So the more you can cup, the closer you bring the force down to this fulcrum over here, and the more weight or more force that you can exert, as well as the less force will be exerted on you.
Typically, we make fun of people on this channel when they're doing really small ranges of motion, but that's in the context of overall body strength, athletic performance for sports that require huge range of motion, American football, basketball, wrestling, soccer, the rest of it, and for bodybuilders that want the most hypertrophy, the most muscle growth. Those folks for sure need big ranges of motion, but in arm wrestling, you don't see arm wrestling matches which are like, all right, we begin here and I go, whoa. That's not how the sport works. A lot of the range of motion comes from the rest of your body movement, and the elbow angle is actually quite small the entire time. This is just good sport training. It's just good specificity.
So, as Dr. Mike said, in arm wrestling, you have both dynamic full range of motion exercises, as well as most of the time we have more closed range of motion or even static type of training. As I talked about in a previous video of mine, having both of these are still very important. I think Dr. Mike sort of downplays a little bit about the full range of motion, more hypertrophy style work, but I can't emphasize how important it is to also have that as a very big building block of any training program that you have, especially earlier on if you are not someone from a strength or weightlifting background, if you are not someone who already has a very big base of muscle to work off of, if you're just a scrawny guy, not much muscle, very, very important to pack on that muscle onto your frame and then build upon that, increasing the strength slowly over time.
Can you build up the musculature in your forearms and your arms through full range of motion training as well? Absolutely, you should be doing some of that as well. But a lot of the training is a very low range of motion because it's specific to the sport.
So, as I said, still important to do that full range of motion style training and build up a strong base for you to work off of.
So arm wrestling, turns out, has like probably about 4 to 5 core movements that you need to be able to be competent in. And that means the training can be both very simple, but actually quite complex, because sometimes just for variation, you can work on 1 or 2 of these in every few week periods to really emphasize them, still work on the others, but de-emphasize them, and then rotate them so you don't get a ton of joint and connective tissue stress, you don't get sore wrists and stuff like that. And then you kind of like build one quality and then build another quality and then build one quality, and you keep improving like that.
Wow, very good advice from Dr. Mike that he just gave. Building your arm wrestling strengths in different blocks. One of the biggest problems I have working with people, coaching them and designing training programs of them, is that I see a lot of arm wrestlers try to squeeze in too many things at once. They try to do, cupping, internal rotation, pronation, back pressure, everything all thrown in. And it's just way too much for the average person to handle unless you're on something. But for those of us who are not sipping on the secret sauce, we are unable to recover fast enough if we jam pack too many things into one little training program. So what I advise most people to do is to pick 2 of their biggest weaknesses and then work on those. And then from block to block, evaluate how much those weaknesses have caught up. If they're still glaring weaknesses, then keep training them, keep focusing on them. That doesn't mean that you completely neglect the other aspects of your arm wrestling. For example, myself, right now I am on a cupping focused program. It doesn't mean that I've completely stopped training back pressure. I still have it 1, maybe 2 days out of the week, but every other day I will be training cupping instead. But overall, wow, pretty good video by Dr. Mike on arm wrestling for someone who is not an arm wrestler himself. He actually touches on a lot of very important points and actually articulates a lot of things that are a little bit difficult to talk about in arm wrestling, explaining the training methodology, explaining the different kind of movements that are involved in arm wrestling. So hats off to him and his research team, really did a good job on that. And for those of you who are struggling to figure out your own arm wrestling training, I do online arm wrestling coaching as well as write training programs. If you want to check out any of that, link in the description below for my website. Also on my Patreon, I upload almost every single day, updating you guys about my own training, what I'm doing day to day, as well as other behind the scenes stuff. If you want to support the channel, please check it out in the description below. Until next time, catch you guys in the next video.